Good afternoon. Good day to you all around the globe. I would like to speak to you about a subject which has always intrigued me within the educational context and is indeed an iceberg because it is what lies beneath the surface that will be of interest here in my presentation. It's because I would like to speak to you about the perception of freedom in the educational context and the parents' voices which I tried to listen to outside of the classroom. And these are the voices that are hidden from the surface of the educational context. Freedom and liberty are concepts which are intertwined with choice. Freedom and liberty in choice are not just related to the exact moment of choice, but go even further. To perform a choice, there are important decisions which allow this choice to happen, including a free and informed environment. To scaffold the system geared towards the informed environment, informed freedom, there needs to be a rational, informed, and voluntary system of choices where critical thinking as well as thorough analysis are key elements in the system. The notion of choice is surely applicable to education systems which guide the students towards a developmental act enlightened by freedom and liberty in choice, not only of subjects and courses, but more importantly, the trajectories towards which the student will eventually act as a citizen within our societies. Decision makers in the educational realm operate a framework whereby the possible options are evaluated, resulting into the best possible outcome according to their assessment, hoping that the knowledge, the skills, and the attitudes and dispositions that children develop will serve for their benefit and for the benefit of others. In this presentation, I shall reflect upon the concept of freedom as it is perceived by parents in Malta, following an online questionnaire randomly shared amongst parents on various platforms with a response of 500 respondents. The participants were parents and were asked to give a general outlook of their own education and how their choices are now reflected onto their own sons and daughters' choices in education. Here I will be reflecting on a few of these questions and how these respondents, who are now today's parents, look back at their own educational trajectories. Who are these participants? To whom are we listening? The questionnaire was offered to a wide audience of parents from various ages and genders. However, it is interesting to note that out of 500 respondents, only 33, that is 6.6%, were male, and 467, which is 93.4%, were females. Their ages varied from 18 to 25 years, with 16 respondents, 26 to 35 years with 122 respondents, 36 to 50 years with 293 respondents, 51 to 65 years of age with 58 respondents, and finally 66 years and over had 11 respondents. Notably, 237 had a tertiary level of education, and the bare minimum of the respondents had only a primary education or less. With this information in mind, the respondents were also asked about the type of institution they attended up to their secondary years, with 30 respondents answering that they attended in a private or independent school, 143 respondents attended in a church or faith school, while 327 attended in a public or state school. Now, it's important to note here that in Malta, primary and secondary education, which is the compulsory part of our educational system is divided into these three sectors: the church or faith schools, state, which are the public schools, and the private independent institutions. Now, there are perceptions of freedom, and to make a true and free choice, one requires a free mind where the agent, despite living in a particular context, he or she is not led or coerced into a choice because of the context, the family, the institution, society, and the rest, but by a process of authentic deliberation. Despite all the values and interests that might influence the deliberative process, it is essential to analyze the source of the concept, that is, to search for the original impression that generates it, enabling the agent to determine the options and the consequences of such choices. The participants in the questionnaire were asked about their own influences during their own schooling years. Their experience in education reflects in some way the experience they pass on to their children depending on the positive or less positive acquaintance with education. This exercise in ownership is not merely the feeling of the student. During their educational journey, parents too have their own perspectives of it, based upon their own past experiences. However, when parents are fully immersed in their children's educational voyage, ownership is felt and expressed. Parental involvement and ownership are the aim we may strive for, and which also involves the free will of the parents themselves. A sound educational system endowed with the philosophy whereby a student is seen as a free agent gives the student him or herself and his parents or guardians the ability to freely choose schools and subjects, and moreover the educational framework through which he or she can pursue a particular trajectory. Ownership and autonomy in the process of choice for an agent is to allow free will to prevail. The more owned is the process, the more likely is the prospect of lifelong learning. The question lies whether the educational structure allows agents to opt for free decisions or a subtle coercion towards specific choices because of the institution's limitations, as well as the national agenda that pushes towards or away from specific trajectories. The fact that 252 respondents do not know or disagree with the statement of themselves owning the process of the subject choice they had in their educational journey reflect the level of ownership that today's parents had during their educational journey as students. Their attitude in their children's educational journey today is certainly affected in some way by their own lack of ownership for the various reasons that characterize their schooling years. Contrastingly, when the respondents answered the question which asked them to identify the source, if any, of their influences or interferences, it was interesting to note that 149 respondents had no influence or interference whatsoever. This is an interesting answer because the education system in Malta, with different schools, offer different options, and not all possible options are offered in every school. Thus, the limitations of the institution itself was not felt as an influence or interference by these respondents. Some others blamed their influence or interference on the school system, with 152 respondents, while 134 claimed that their parents or guardians did influence or interfere their choices in education. It was only 56 who were influenced by their friends and their choices while they were in the process of deciding for themselves. The mind that can analyze and process any values which may directly or indirectly influence decision making is still able to think over and above that same influence. This would enable the agent to reflect on the given options, their values, and the consequences that follow if any option is chosen over a set of other availabilities. It is beyond reasonable doubt that all students are influenced in some way or another. However, it is equally undoubtedly true that if any influence, interference, or constraints are purely accidental and not on purpose to limit free will, critical-minded students will be able to own the process and pursue further their choices with an intrinsic sense of freedom. When we try to apply freedom towards flourishing, we have a crucial question which all stakeholders in the educational decision-making process need to reflect upon as the degree, if any, of bestowing values and beliefs onto students. This is more relevant if the values and beliefs being conveyed are at loggerheads with the values and beliefs that the students already possess in their families, their societies, and whichever context they come from. The more educators elicit from the students and provide a journey of development through the elicited information, the better will the student perceive the input given to and from him or her. The mix between direct and non-direct teaching, directive and non-directive teaching, is still a valid pedagogical approach. Eliciting as well as imparting knowledge as a set of facts is an integral part of education. Yet this should not restrict the educator from making use of false beliefs, either to develop or else to make use of, as an example, in a respectful manner. When an educator specifies what is to be considered as an education good for students to aim to flourish, knowledge and truth are key elements to an effective formation. Depending on what flourishment is intended, the educational goods would vary not only in content, but also in the density with which these are presented as decisions, such as this, that would often part a collective decision-making process. As a way of conclusion, the assumption that education is either a total control or else total free will of the student goes totally against the nature of education itself. For if the student is totally free in his or her free will, when the educational goods presented to him or her are completely useless, almost doubting the freedom of will of the student with a limited amount of goods as well as the possible trajectories. What Robert F. Dearden suggests is that the development of autonomy as an educational aim within the context of development of the person, where his or her thought and action is an important area of his or her life, and these are to be explained by reference of his or her own choices, decisions, reflections, deliberations. What Dearden is suggesting here is that the whole process is not only owned, but also powered by the agent's own activity of mind. And this is most probably what we all have at heart. We all aim in education to develop the own activity of mind of the student in order to develop the autonomy of the agent, the student, not because we are totally free, not because education is in total control over ourselves, but because the individual is the center of the whole activity. Thank you so much for your attention.